Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Lois. If you're new here, please subscribe, please like, share and turn on your notification bell. Let's learn how to make this beautiful dress right here. Okay, so I have gone ahead to mark out my starting line. The first thing I am going to do is to mark out my shoulder measurement. My shoulder measurement is 15. 15 divided by 2 is 7.5 plus half inches seam allowance, that's 8. So that is what I am marking out. The next thing we're going to do is to get our vertical measurement. So vertical measurement, I mean our bust point, waistline and stuff like that. So the first thing is to measure my bust point, which is 10. I'm measuring my bust point, which is 10. So I'm going to go ahead and measure my under bust, which is 13. My half waist is 16. Shoulder to hip is 23. And my shoulder to the half length is 27. But I'm going to add 1 inches, which is 28. You're going to understand why I added that 1 inches. So now I'm just going to mark out these lines. I'm going to mark it across to get a straight line. Just watch as I do it. So I'm done marking out the lines. This place is going to be my bust point, under bust. The other line is going to be my half waist. The other place is going to be my hip measurement, then my half length measurement. So now the first thing we are going to do is to get our neck width. The neck width I'm working with is 4 inches. So I'm going to come down for the depth. I'm going to be using 3.5 inches. And I'm going to use my curve ruler to connect it. So that is going to be the measurement for my neck. So where I marked for my shoulder measurement, which is 8 inches, I'm going to come down by 1 inches to get our shoulder slant. We all know our shoulders are not straight. So I'm going to mark out my shoulder slants. So from there, I'm going to mark the line downward. But before we do that, we're going to get our chest line first. It is a standard to come up by 2 inches from your bust point. That is going to serve as your chest line. So I've done that and I'm going to rule a line across it. Then from my shoulder, from the 1 inch slant and from the 1 inches I came down by, I'm going to connect it straight to the shoulder line, to the chest line rather. So the next thing we're going to do is to get our midpoint. I'm going to measure now. I have 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. From that point, I'm going to go in by half inches and I'm going to connect from the midpoint to the top and to the bottom, just like you see me doing. So it is time for us to start imputing our horizontal measurements. The first thing we're going to do is to get our bust measurement. So we're going to place our tape rule on the chest line, not the bust point. We're going to place it. The bust measurement I'm working with is 33. That's on fold divided by 4 is 8.2 inches. 33. I'm going to add extra 2.5 inches allowance. So you're just going to extend the armhole curve to meet the allowance you added. The next thing we're going to do now is to measure our under bust. The under bust I'm working with is 29. Divided by 4 is 7.2. I've marked it. And I'm also going to add extra 2.5 inches seam allowance. The next one now, I'm going to go to my half waist. The half waist I'm working with is 27. Divided by 4. What I got, I marked it, then I added 2.5 inches sewing allowance. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for the hip. The hip I'm working with is 39. 39 divided by 4. I'm going to impute the measurements. So you can use, please remember to use your own measurements. So I'm going to add 2.5 inches extra allowance, sewing allowance. So I'm going to go down, that's the half length where the main fabric stops. I'm just going to impute the measurement I have for my hip, the same measurement I used for my hip. Then I'm going to add 2.5 inches allowance. I'm sorry my camera could not capture it. So the next thing we're going to do now is to connect all the points together. So the next thing for us to do now is to take out our darts. My nipple to nipple is 7.5 divided by 2 plus half inches. So I'm just going to put impute 4 inches. So from my hip line, I'm going to measure 4 inches upward to my bust point. So on my bust point, I'm going to come down by 1 inches. Then I am going to draw it. After coming down by 1 inches, I'm going to draw a straight line to connect the 4 inches measurement I took. So this is what we have. The next thing that we're going to do after drawing out our lines is to take out our half inches on both sides. That's on the half waist. So I'm going to take out half inches on both sides. Then I'm going to connect to the top and connect to the bottom too. So you're connecting the half inches you took out. That's approximately 1 inch from the half waist to the bust point and also to the hip line. So my bust point, I'm going to come down by 1.5 inches and I am going to connect from that point to my bust point. So on my shoulder line, I'm going to add extra half inches seam allowance. I love adding it because I make mistakes sometimes and I forget to add it. So I'm just going to add it. So the next thing we're going to do now is to replace the darts we took out. 1 inches, we're going to replace it back on the half waist. And whatever we took out at the underbows, we're going to replace it back and connect it back to the hip line. So after connecting, you're just going to use your free hand to get rid of the sharp edges. So now we're just going to cut it out. Now we have our front pattern ready for use. We're going to transfer this pattern to our main fabric. So we have our front pattern. We do not need to cut a back pattern because I'm still going to use this front pattern to cut out my back pattern. I had to transfer my fabric to the floor for you guys to have a better view. So if you notice, when you take out these darts, it is no longer going to be equal on that side. So it's going to shorten. So what we're going to do is on that bust point, you're going to measure out 0.75 inches, just like you see me doing. You're going to measure out 0.75 inches and then you're going to connect it back to the under bust. Then you're also going to connect it up to the where the armhole ended. So this way, when you take in the dart, it's not going to shorten by the side. You get. So the next thing we're going to do is to add extra 2 inches allowance for seam, just like you see me doing. And then after doing that, we're just going to cut out our fabric. Okay, so since I'm not going to be cutting out the dart on the fabric, you're just going to transfer the dart on the main fabric. So the same way you measured out your dart on your pattern, you're going to do the same thing, just like you see me doing the side dart and the middle dart. You're going to measure everything and cut it out and trace it out. So it's time to cut out our back pattern. So the first thing I'm going to do is to measure out my zip allowance. I'm using 2 inches for my zip allowance. I have marked it, connected the lines. Then I am going to place my front pattern on the line. It's going to start on the line I traced out. So we're going to eliminate zip bulge. How to do that is on our half waist, I'm going to measure 1 inches on the half waist. Notice on the half waist, I'm going to measure 1 inches. Then from that 1 inches, I'm going to connect it. I'm going to connect it down to the hip line. I'm also going to connect it back. So when you do this, your zip is going to lay flat on your back. There won't be any kind of bulge on your back. It's just going to lay flat on your back. So it is very important for you to do this. Take out 1 inches. That way when you fix your zip, it's going to be straight. So the next thing we're going to do is to also transfer the darts on the back pattern. But this time around, the side dart, we're not going to add it. We're just going to transfer the middle dart because we're not trying to tighten our bust here. So on the neckline, I'm just going to come up a little bit and trace it. I don't want my back neckline to be as deep as my front neckline. So don't forget, you're just going to trace out your middle dart. Okay, so guys, I made a mistake. I forgot to add extra 2 inches seam allowance at the length. So when you're cutting yours, please do not forget to add your extra 2 inches seam allowance at the length, just as we did for the front. So I'm just going to cut out my fabric now. So the dart you have on your pattern paper, just the middle dart alone, you're going to transfer it back to the main fabric. Remember, for the back pattern, we're not adding the side dart, just the middle dart. You're going to transfer it and sew it on the main fabric. Do not forget, we measured 1 inches that we're going to take out. So that is what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to cut out the 1 inches I took out at the halfway. So do not forget to cut it out. After doing this, I'm going to go ahead to cut out my lining. Just like you see, I cut out my lining for both the front and the back. So you're going to sew your darts on the fabric. So I've cut out my lining. You're just going to place it, turn the neck with the lining, sew on it, and sew on both sides. That way you'll be able to turn it inside out. Okay, so I have gone ahead to turn my lining for both the front and the back, and I've also sewn my darts, and I've also fixed my zip. And for the front too, I've turned it, and you can see that I've sewn the darts for both sides. So the next thing we're going to do now is to start joining our fabrics together. So the first thing we're going to do is to join them by the shoulder. We're going to join them by the shoulder. Place the back on the floor first or on your table first, then you place the front on it. So since it has a lining, you're going to place both shoulders together, then the lining for the back, you're going to use it and turn it to the front. So that way when you sew it, the sewing allowance is not going to be showing outside. Instead, it's going to be inside, and it's going to make it look very neat. So after sewing both of the shoulder, I am going to sew my side. I'm going to join it by the side. I'm going to use my measurements. So in your case, you're going to use your measurements, my bust and half waist. Then I'm going to join on both sides. So I have joined both sides, and I have gone ahead to trim out the excess of the cloth. So the full length I'm working with is 42. But the half length, which is this main fabric, is 27. Do not forget we added 1 extra inches allowance. The reason is because so that we have 1 extra inches for us to place our gathers on it, since we are sewing it outside. So I'm going to mark out the 1 inches extra that is there. I'm going to mark it across. I'm going to mark it round to form a line. So it is on that line that I am going to place my gathers. So I'm going to also measure the 1 inches round for the back. So when I sew, I'm going to sew my gathers on that 1 inches, that line, the new line that I marked out. So for us to get the measurement of our gathers, we're going to measure the whole width. The width is 21, front and back, that's 21 times 2, that's 42. So to get the length I'm going to be using for the gathers, I'm going to multiply by 3, that's 42 multiplied by 3, and I have about 126. So I'm going to cut out the gathers now. So this main fabric, the length is going to be 126. You measure 126. Sorry, the width is going to be 126. And then for the length, do not forget that I said the full length, the total length I'm working with is 42. So I just placed, and the other Ankara fabric I have 27. So from that 27, I marked out my 42 inches. Then I'm going to still have 3 inches extra allowance. The reason why I added 3 inches extra allowance is because at the top I'm going to be sewing with 1.5 inches. So I've gone ahead to sew a loose stitch round the width at the top. I measured 1.5 inches. That's where I started my loose stitch from, just like you see. So now I'm just going to, you see me measuring 1.5 inches. That's where I started the loose stitch on. So I'm just going to gather it round, and do not forget I've taped both ends. I've taped the up and I've also folded the down. So I'm just going to gather this round to get my 42 inches. That's the width I'm working with, the actual width I'm working with, which is 42 inches. So I'm done gathering. I've gathered everything, and at the end, after I made sure the gathers is up to 42 inches, I went ahead to join it. I closed it at the end, so it's going to form like a skirt or something. So I've closed it at the end. So the next thing we're going to do now is to attach these gathers to our main fabric. So I'm just going to place both fabric, the main fabric and the gathered fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wear the main fabric inside the gathers. And the reason why we're doing this is because we're actually sewing on the outside. We're not sewing on the inside. So where I joined the gathers, I'm going to join it to where, this is it. I'm going to join it to where I joined the back. So you're going to open it up and place and pin your gathers to that 1 inches mark, the 1 inches line that we marked. So the joining at the gathers, you're going to place it on the joining or the zip allowance. So this way is going to, so you're going to continue like this. You're going to pin everything until you finish pinning the whole gathers, the fabric, the black fabric on the main fabric. Then you're going to top stitch on the clothes. So be careful so that you won't top stitch both of them together. You're going to open it up and top stitch on it. So for the sleeve, I am going to measure to check if what I have here is up to my armhole measurement, which is 9. So I'm going to measure and it's not up to, so I'm just going to trim it out a little bit so that I will get my 9 inches. Then now I'm going to go straight into cutting my sleeve. So I'm going to be cutting a cap sleeve. The first thing you're going to do on your pattern is to measure out the length. The length of my cap sleeve is 4, so you're going to measure it across. Rule a straight line just like you see me doing. Then on the line, I'm going to measure my round sleeve measurement, which is 11 divided by 2, that's 5.5 plus 1.5 inches allowance. Then I am going to come down by 1 inches. The reason why we're doing this is for us to have that curve on the sleeve. So I'm going to connect from that point back to the length I measured, which is 4. So at the top, I'm going to measure 2.5 inches to get my cap. So I'm going to measure 2.5 inches. So after doing that, I'm going to measure the round armhole I'm working with, which is 9 inches. I'm going to measure that now. I'm going to get my 9 inches. After getting my 9 inches mark, then I'm going to connect from that 2.5 inches I marked to my 9 inches. So I'm going to add extra 1.5 inches seam allowance, just like I added at the round sleeve measurement. I'm going to add 1.5 inches seam allowance, and I'm going to just extend it and connect it back to the round sleeve measurement. So on the main fabric, I'm going to add extra 1/2 inches allowance at the top and the bottom for seam allowance. Then I'm going to cut out both sleeves rather. So here we have our sleeve now. So we're just going to attach it to our armhole. So I've already trimmed out what I wanted to trim out. I have 9 inches there already on the armhole. So I'm just going to turn it with lining. So you're just going to place it like this and sew. What you're going to do is, on your round sleeve, you're going to measure your round sleeve measurement. Mine is 5.5 on fold, which is 11 when you're going to measure. So you measure your 5.5 on the round sleeve, and on the upper part you're going to measure your armhole measurement, which is 9. So after doing that, you're just going to connect and sew. So when you sew, you're going to attach it to the sleeve like this. So this is the final look. Drop a comment if you found this helpful and if you're going to try it out.